Hi, and thanks very much for joining me. I'm Dean, and today we're going to be having a look at my Titan table saw. Now, this is a super budget offering from Screwfix in the UK, and this is coming through at around about £120, £130 thereabouts. So, is it absolute garbage for that money? Well, I've been using it for a few months now, and I've got some pros and some cons. Am I keeping it? That's something altogether different, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But one of the other things that I wanted to talk about in this video was actually the upgrades that I've managed to do to this, which I think have made it a much better and more usable saw. So let me take you through those first and foremost. When you assemble the Titan table saw and pop it all together, it does have this measuring fence, which this sits along the front with a couple of bolts so you can make sure that it's in the right place. Then you have the fence itself that sits along the front of that. You've got a couple of pieces sticking out at the bottom which run along the groove, and then when you use the tightening leg, it moves something, this little bit of plastic, where it moves it into the front of the fence. Now, I found this to be very wobbly when it came to accuracy, and also just even setting it so it would sit straight for the first time became incredibly difficult. I tried putting shims behind these screws to try and get more accurate, and that was getting me nowhere. So basically, I'm not a fan of the fence. It'll get you through it, but it won't get you anything accurate. And so here's what I did next. So this is the design that I went with. I did see someone make something similar on the YouTubes. I can't remember who it was though, so I would leave a link if I could remember who it was, but I can't. Now, it looks like it's going to be super technical, but it's actually really, really simple. There's no need for plans. It goes together in a really straightforward fashion. So what I'll do is, if I take these screws out of the top here, then we can simply take this top section out, and we can see the internals of this little fence system. So all it is an M8 threaded bar going through the middle. I've put some randomly sort of spaced support slots in there, and screwed those in at the sides. And at the front here, I've made a little star-like knob with the nut is kind of inset in there, so it stops the nut spinning around. So when I move that, what actually happens is at the back end there, that is tightening up this section, this large kind of T-shaped piece, so I can undo it. And once it's undone, this is all now nice and loose. So all that has to happen is you pop that onto the table. You would measure it to make sure that you've got it exactly as straight as you want it, because it can go off a little bit, and then tighten it up, and away you go. That's it. It's not going anywhere, and that is a massive upgrade to the very poor fence that comes with the Titan. Super easy to build. Like I said, no plans necessary, because it's just 18mm MDF along the sides. We've got some supports in the middle. We've got a threaded bar running all the way through, and we've got a flat piece at the front and a T section at the back that that snugs up against the back of the table. So it's a really, really simple upgrade to throw together, and you don't really have to know what you're doing. If I made it, literally anybody can. Okay, so the next upgrade was this zero clearance, and that's because when I take that out, when the original one goes back in there, you do have 6 screws that hold it in, but obviously we've got quite the gap in there to make sure that it can accommodate the 45-degree turn for the blade. That I didn't like very much, because I kept losing wood going down there. So I got rid of that. You'll notice that I've still got some screws going along this side, but I haven't on this side. Oops, we'll put that there. And that's because I'm using those screws to level out this bit of plywood. Again, super easy to make. And this was just a bit of plywood that I got on the router table and routed out the insides. I used the original plate as a guide, and away you go. Now, one of the things that I would say about doing this is still very, very wobbly. I mean, the plastic of the original is as well, but if I was to make it again, I would use either a hardwood, or I would make or I would use plastic or something along those lines. The problem with this is that underneath the section here, this section here, this is really high up, so you don't really have much depth to go on there. So when you're making your own zero clearance plate, it's actually really, really shallow. And if it's just this side, then that's fine. But because you've got this section here that is super high up, it just makes it really, really difficult to go with the zero clearance. And so that's something that I think should be better on this particular model of saw. This doesn't need to be quite as high as it does, yeah, and this, if this was a little bit deeper, it would be easier to make a zero clearance plate for safety, if nothing else, you know. So that's something that I think should happen. There's loads of videos on the internet about making zero clearance plates, but it's just crazy simple to do, and I strongly suggest anyone give it a bash. I would probably screw it down. Don't do what I've done there and just leave it open to be flicking off wherever you want it. But yeah, otherwise that's just another improvement. The next issue with these is the T-slots or the Mitre slots that are going around to the sides there, because they are not super accurate. Now then, when we've got the sizing, we can't use any kind of additional mitre gauges and so on. So let's have a little look and see what you've got to make if you want to do it. This comes through at about, where are we, 18.99, so say 19 mil. And then at the top there, we've got 12.95, so say 13 mil going along the top there. And it's not far out from being sort of legit, but because this is really, really thin, this little section here, it just makes it really difficult to make mitre slots. So I apologise for it keep going out of focus. I don't know why we're not locking focus, but there we go. Anyway, that's that. So what did I do to fix it? So simple and crude. I got a big old bit of hardwood going along here. I measured it and just took it down a little bit at a time with a hand plane to get it to fit snugly in the top of this this slot. So it actually runs along these inner rails. Now, one of the other things that I did was use a bit of sandpaper to go along the inside of these rails because they were actually really quite rough. And so that changes the size. In fact, this is still a little bit tighter at this point than it is at this point. So, you know, it's one of those things. But on top of the, I used all of the original hardware apart from what was underneath it, because it was wobbly as you like. I then screwed a bit of ply to the fence itself, and then I can use this clamp to pop little bits of wood together and use that as a guide or as a cutting guide. And one of the things that I would say is never, ever really kind of focus in on what we've got numbers wise on here, because odds are that'll probably be out a little bit. The easiest way that I've found to do it is to get an angle guide such as this one, and then we get that to say 45. 45.2 will do for this demonstration, and then we pop that up against the blade, then we move the fence into it and just make sure that we have the angle of the fence the same as the ruler. Making some quick cuts there with that mitre fence that I just showed you. You can see that we can get kind of a reasonably okay looking picture frame with reasonable corners. Not as precise as perfect, but still could be worse. Something else that absolutely everybody with the table saw should make is a crosscut sled, and this was again super easy. Loads of ideas about crosscut sleds on the internet, but to do cross cutting and for general safety, this has been an absolute workhorse for me. Super easy to build. Again, it's just a flat piece of 18mm MDF at the back there, or underneath. We've got a couple of vertical pieces. I put this measuring strip on it just to see if that would be useful. It's not. And then I got one of these hand toggle clamps and just threw that onto a few pieces of wood, and that way I've got a solid stop if I need them, or if I need it for making short repeatable pieces, and I can lock that into place like so. But otherwise, that's super easy. When it comes to making the underneath, when it comes to making the rails, I've just got MDF on those at the moment and I've had no problem. What I will say is if you see videos about making these, the thing you do need to do is when you're putting your the rails in here in the first instance, you've got them on top of washers and all that sort of stuff, definitely pack them out so you're packing them to the outside, so a bit of paper or playing card or whatever for both rails, so they're nice and snug up against the Mitre slot, and that will save you a lot of aggro moving forward. But since I made this, I've used it a bunch, and I think it's been a really strong and useful addition to the table saw. Finally, we have underneath the table, we've got the legs, because the metal legs that come with it take up a hell of a lot of space. So I just made a super simple base for it, where I can store my crosscut sled on the side, and that's not going anywhere, and it's on wheels, so I can move it around my very small workshop to make sure that I've got access to it and access to other things all the time. That really has helped the useful nature and it not being too imposing on my little work. So that's about it. That's the modifications that I've made to my Titan table saw, and it does do a grand job. Now, if you saw one of my shorts that I did the other day, you will see that I do have quite a significant issue with my particular one, and that's that underneath here the blade is anchored at the front. It's anchored quite nicely at the front section, and don't worry, this is unplugged, but it's anchored at the front because that's where you've got your height adjustment and the angle adjustment and all that sort of goings. Now at the back there it is not at all, and so when you move the exhaust port for the dust collection, it can actually move the blade, and that means also that the blade can actually move a little bit side to side, so it's less than accurate when you want it to be. That to me is quite an issue, and I've put that on a few Facebook groups, and a number of other people have said that their saw doesn't do that. So whether it's just this particular one or not, I don't know, but for this one it certainly did cause an issue. And if you want to see how much that moves, I'll pop a little bit of video into this right now. You can see that with very light pressure, it does move just a couple of degrees, but enough to cause you problems moving forward. Now, that being said, do I regret buying this table saw? No, absolutely not. When I started woodworking earlier this year, I wanted a table saw, I did some research, and this seemed to be the best bang for the buck. And I genuinely think it has been that way. I've used this a heck of a lot, and it was only recently when I thought I was going to have to adjust the blade actually inside the machine that I came across the reason why I wasn't getting 90 degrees all the time, and that to me has caused me a bit of a headache for some of the projects that I've got planned. So when it comes to value for money, definitely there. Build quality at this price level is always going to be super ropey, but it's not been terrible, to be fair. For 130 quid or whatever it was that I bought this for, it's done a grand job. And I've really learned a lot about not only woodworking, but also table saws by using this. And the very fact that most of the stuff that I've built in my shop so far has been to actually make my shop work. So from the router table to the workbench to, you know, storage and all this sort of stuff, it's all been stuff that I've made to make my woodworking experience easier. This has been part of that, and I don't regret it one moment. But hopefully the little additions that I've made to this will be useful to somebody out there, and hopefully inspire you to have a crack at doing things yourself. Just because it's not perfect doesn't mean it's no good. It just means that you need to have a little bit of ingenuity to figure out how you can make it better. And that is about it. Thank you so much for watching. If you thought this was useful, please do leave a like and comment down below about whether you've got one of these Titan table saws and what you think of it. Also, tell me what you would upgrade to. What would be your next saw that you would go to after something like the Titan? Would it be a Bosch or a DeWalt, or, you know, would you go all in for the Axminsters and Craftsmans of this world and all that sort of stuff? Let me, not Craftsman. Charnwood. They're the people. Let me know what you think. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.